This is a regular Shio Pan 1 hour after baking. And this is my version of Shio Pan 1 hour after baking. No fancy ingredients, no complicated steps. This video is all you need to make perfect Shio Pan based on science. Hey, Serpent here. Welcome back to the channel. According to these Japanese articles, saltbread, or Shio Pan, was invented by a small bakery owner in a seaside city. It was an attempt to revitalize business during the summer, as people typically pivot toward cold noodles or watermelon desserts when the heat hits. He was reportedly inspired by a tip from his son, who mentioned that French bread sprinkled with salt is popular. And so Shio Pan was born. Now, I've been trying to pinpoint the specific French bread that might have inspired this. I thought of the fougasse provençal, which is seasoned with olive oil and coarse sea salt, but the shape is all wrong, and fougasse usually involves herbs or olives. There's no resemblance at all. The best I could come up with based on the shape is a croissant. It's a bread filled with butter, shaped like a croissant, and topped with a sprinkle of salt. I dug as far as I could into the Wikipedia archives on bread and salt, but I found nothing quite like it in the West, so I'm officially giving up. If you know of any Western bread you think might have inspired this, please leave a comment below. I'd really appreciate it. Putting my burning curiosity aside, when Shio Pan first debuted, it was actually a flop. It took 4 years for these rolls to finally take off, but they have since become extraordinarily popular across East Asia. In South Korea, it's known as Pan, and in China, it goes by several names, including salt croissant and salt bread. It's a fascinating, ironic twist. Despite the recent revival of artisan bread, overall bread consumption in France continues to decline as salt intake is reined in. Yet half a world away, in Asia, this French-inspired salt bread is seeing a massive rise in popularity. A big part of this obsession is the bread's unique textural contrast. To replicate it, you must first nail that signature crispy crust, a crackling shell that perfectly wraps a soft, buttery crumb. In commercial and artisan settings, this feat is typically achieved through steaming. So, okay, obviously not all home ovens come equipped with a steaming setup, mine included. So to stimulate the effect, we often use a pan of water, lava stones, or better yet, a Dutch oven. Of course, you could also just buy an oven with a built-in steam function, or spray your dough like crazy if you're desperate enough. For this recipe, however, I've chosen not to do any of that. Clearly, a different solution is needed. To that end, I've spent weeks poring over the science of crispy bread, and I think I now have the confidence to make a better Shio Pan without using steaming or needing to spray the dough. Now, I don't have anything against using steam. It has a long history in bread baking. My biggest problem with using it for Shio Pan is twofold. One, it's really troublesome without a professional steam oven. Two, and more importantly, Shio Pan made with steam can quickly lose its crispiness. To understand why, we need to look at what steam actually does. I cover this in more detail in my dedicated video on steam, but to put it simply, steam is water in a hot gaseous form. When it comes into contact with the dough, it condenses, and the moisture provides the water necessary for surface starch granules to fully gelatinize. It's the same principle as Tangzhong, but applied to the surface. This creates a starch paste that dries into a glossy, smooth skin. It also leads to more intense browning because gelatinization helps reducing sugars. When these sugars meet amino acids from the gluten, they trigger the Maillard reaction, provided the temperature is in the right range, typically 140 to 165 degrees Celsius. Steam also increases the bread's volume by delaying the setting of the crust, allowing it to rise for longer. But the main point here is that steam leads to a denser, thicker crust filled with gelatinized and damaged starch. While that can be very crunchy and nice at first, the issue is that this thick layer can actually trap water vapor escaping from inside the bread. This leads to a moisture buildup that turns the crust from brittle to soggy much more quickly. Research indicates that half of the sensory crispness is lost once the moisture content of the crust exceeds 10%. Above 11%, the softening effect of water becomes dominant, and the material's stiffness, or apparent modulus, decreases significantly. Left alone, any bread crust will eventually lose its crispiness because moisture from the crumb and air migrates into it, turning it rubbery rather than brittle. In summary, anything that increases moisture in the crust destroys the crispy texture. If steam creates a thicker, less permeable layer, that's a problem. However, that doesn't mean we should make a complete 180 and bake the dough as dry as possible. Avoiding moisture or gelatinized starch entirely leads to another problem: the gluten. Gluten refers to the proteins that form a continuous network in our bread. While this network is great for the crumb, allowing the bread to rise, a strong protein structure in the crust increases its water-holding capacity. In fact, researchers found that the higher protein flours create crust with higher initial moisture levels. Conversely, using protease enzymes to create a looser, more open structure resulted in a 6-fold increase in crispness retention. Okay, so how do we get the crispiest, longest-lasting Shio Pan? First, we're going to lower the flour's protein content by using a mix of all-purpose and bread flour. Second, we'll use Tangzhong inside the dough and brush a layer of gelatinized starch on top before it hits the oven. As we mentioned, crust permeability is crucial for lasting crispness. One research paper suggested that increasing the gelatinized starch content in the crust improves this permeability. To adapt this for home baking, I decided to use a gelatinized starch solution brushed directly onto the dough before baking. I've tested several flours for the starch layer and found that rice flour is the clear winner. Likely due to its much higher starch to protein ratio, this layer allows the crust to stay crispy significantly longer. Even in my extremely humid climate, 91% relative humidity right after a rainstorm, the rice flour version was the only one that remained crispy an hour after baking. If you don't have rice flour, cake flour is your next best bet. All-purpose flour works too, though the crispiness won't last quite as long. Ultimately, this layer creates a thin crust with microscopic cracks. The gelatinized starch disrupts the gluten network's ability to absorb thermal shocks, and these tiny cracks allow water vapor to escape rather than softening the crust from within. It's the perfect workaround. We avoid the sogginess of steam while bypassing the leathery nature of a continuous gluten network. If you plan to eat your Shio Pan immediately or within a short period of time, you can still use a simple water spray or light steam. But to truly maximize crispness retention, make sure to follow this next incredibly easy step. Remove the bread from the oven immediately after baking. Research shows that this temperature shock of moving from a hot oven to a cool kitchen creates additional micro cracks in the crust, further helping it stay brittle. And before we move on, of course, proper baking is essential. Shio Pan requires more care than other breads because the butter-flooded bottom of the pan essentially fries the dough. To prevent the bottom from burning before the top sets, I recommend placing your baking pan closer to the top of the oven and baking for longer too to help dry out the crust. Finally, let's talk about the salt. It's often overlooked in viral videos, but it's the soul of the original Japanese Shio Pan. Many Japanese bakeries prefer rock salt over sea salt, claiming it has a sweeter, less aggressive taste. While both originate from the sea, rock salt comes from ancient dried-up deposits. Now, my research didn't necessarily confirm a sweeter chemical profile, but it did reveal a fascinating physical difference: crystal structure. Certain rock salts can have compact cubic structures that dissolve much more slowly in the mouth compared to the hollow, pyramidal, or flaky structures of sea salts like Maldon or kosher salt. In studies using artificial saliva, researchers found that this compact rock salt dissolved about 3.6 times more slowly than agglomerated salt crystals. Because they dissolve slowly, they deliver sodium to your taste receptors more gradually. Consequently, this kind of rock salt can exhibit a significantly lower maximum saltiness intensity compared to sea salt or flaky salts when consumed in its crystal form. So it really comes down to preference. If you want an immediate salty blast on your Shio Pan, go with a flakier sea salt. If you prefer a more subtle, delayed saltiness, then coarse and compact rock salt is the way to go. Although you might have to try a few different salts because there may be other variations in flavor. One practical tip: if you want the salt to stay bright white after baking, be careful with your salt choice. A super easy option is pretzel salt. I've experimented with unrefined sea salt from my local area, but it actually turned black in the oven, likely due to organic matter, clay, and trace minerals. At high baking temperatures, these organic impurities can carbonize, and minerals like iron can oxidize, resulting in a dark gray or black appearance. And now that we've covered the science, let's get into the recipe. So let's bake some Shio Pan. This recipe makes 5 crispy and delicious Shio Pan rolls. I've also found that this recipe makes for a really soft Shio Pan crumb. I've made the recipe without adding butter inside, and it is still super delicious. So it's perfect for beginners too, because the dough is really easy to handle. And I know a lot of people may have trouble figuring out why their bread dough is still sticky even after kneading. Well, this dough has a lot of steps that prevent that, because we're using cold water, Tangzhong, and the bassignage technique of adding water gradually to ensure an easier dough to handle. I love the feel of this dough, and it's a dream to work with. So let's get started. As always, we begin the process the day before by preparing the Tangzhong and the Poolish. First up, the Tangzhong. Have your measured flour ready, pour boiling water into a heat-proof bowl, then immediately add the bread flour. Use a spoon to combine quickly until no dry flour remains, and you have a thick paste-like mixture. Scrape down the bowl and spatula. Cover tightly, let it cool to room temperature, and then we'll pop it into the fridge overnight. Next, the Poolish. In another bowl, combine bread flour, instant yeast, and water. Start mixing these together using chopsticks. Stir, and it should quickly come together. Keep going until it forms a cohesive, shaggy dough and all the flour is incorporated. It doesn't need extensive mixing. Once done, cover the bowl with a silicone cap, and we let it sit at room temperature for about an hour to kickstart fermentation, then refrigerate it overnight alongside the Tangzhong. The next day, it should look bubbly and have risen up before coming down slightly like this. Okay, our Tangzhong and Poolish have had their overnight rest and are ready for action. We will be adding in the ingredients in a certain order so that we can use the gradual water addition method that I talked about in my previous videos. This should help with the dough strength and make it at least a little easier to handle, which is great. We've also taken the butter out ahead of time so that it can soften a bit. Right, let's start by scooping the Poolish into the stand mixer bowl using a spatula. Add the all-purpose flour, bread flour, sugar, salt. Now pour in about 3/4 of the milk. We're reserving the rest and we'll add it later. Secure the bowl to the mixer, fitted with a dough hook. Start mixing on medium speed for 3 minutes. It will form a rough mass initially, and there will still be lots of dry pieces by the side. That's perfectly fine. We pause the mixer, and just before we throw the Tangzhong in, we're going to add all of the remaining milk to the Tangzhong and break it up briefly, just giving it a minute to soften up. This step helps to prevent clumps inside the dough later. Then we add the Tangzhong into the mixing bowl, making sure to get all of it inside. Lock the mixer, restart it on medium speed, and mix for another 4 to 5 minutes. The dough should start looking smoother and more unified. We're not aiming for a perfectly smooth dough, but we need to make sure everything is properly combined, like this. Add the softened butter into the bowl. Mixing on medium speed for an additional 6 to 8 minutes. The dough will incorporate the butter and become smooth and pliable. It should also wrap around the dough hook to a certain extent, creating a round ball in the center, although it will still remain a bit tacky and stick to the sides of the bowl a bit. After mixing in the butter, we're going to now check for gluten development with the Windowpane test. Stop the mixer. Pull off a small chunk of dough, gently stretching it out. You're looking for a thin membrane that you can almost see through without it tearing immediately. If it passes this test, we're ready for the next stage. And it does, so it's time for bulk fermentation. Prepare a bowl for the dough to rest in, and we're going to use a bit of oil to line it and our hands. Then we use a flexible scraper to remove the dough from the stand mixer's bowl. We will now quickly shape the dough into a taut ball. Just light and easy. Place it into the prepared bowl, cover securely, and let it rest for 1 hour for the bulk fermentation or until it doubles in size. You could also put the dough in the fridge to rest overnight for a fruitier aroma and less lipid oxidation, as I mentioned in my previous video on cold fermentation. Regardless of how you ferment the dough, it should look noticeably puffier and light by the end of bulk fermentation. And to continue, we'll lightly flour the work surface and the dough. We're going to punch the dough down first, and then take it out of the bowl. I also like to knead the bread dough a little bit so that we can strengthen the dough and fully degas the bubbles. Now we use a scale to divide the dough into 5 equal pieces. Use flour as needed, as this dough can be a little bit tacky, as I mentioned. If your dough is cold, then you can get away with using even less flour, which is very convenient. Once we have our divided pieces, we're going to pre-shape them like so. Take one piece and fold in the top and bottom to make it a thicker rectangle. Then we want to use more pressure on one hand, rolling each piece into a tapered cone or teardrop shape. Repeat for all pieces. It doesn't have to be perfect, just roughly cone-like. And as you get better at this, it'll take less and less time. I spent less than a minute on each piece of dough here. Use flour as needed. You might need to sprinkle a little here and there. Then cover the pre-shaped pieces, and we're going to let them bench rest for 15 minutes. Now, if you live in a warmer climate, I highly recommend letting the dough sit in the fridge for around 20 to 30 minutes before shaping. This helps to improve the handling, makes shaping easier, and allows you to get these incredibly neat rolls. It's really more of an aesthetic thing than it is a taste thing. All right, bench rest is over. Let's shape our Shio Pan. Lightly flour your surface. Take one cone, and we're going to stretch it out and use a rolling pin to flatten it like this, going from the base to the tip. Aim for a base of about 6 to 7 centimeters or more, and a very long tapered tip. This way of stretching the Shio Pan results in neater results than going the other way. Next, place one block of cold butter, which should be around 15 grams, along the base of the triangle. Then, to get that beautiful hole in the center of the bread, we want to basically seal the butter inside, pulling in the dough to cover the butter, and then rolling it as well, sealing the edges like so. This step is skipped by many Shio Pan recipes, probably because the main goal is for the butter to melt and fry the bottom, but I found that in my case, if I don't seal the butter inside the dough, practically none of it remains inside, likely because of the very warm climate here. So if you, like me, live in a warmer climate and want that beautiful little hole in the center, you should seal the cold butter inside the dough. Then, starting from the base where the butter is, tightly roll the dough toward the long tapered tip. As you roll, try to keep the dough tense, tugging it every once in a while until you reach the end. The long tip will naturally create a longer, thinner edge to your roll. Once rolled, if you need to, press the tip firmly to the body of the roll to seal it. If you've gotten everything just right, it should stick on automatically, but if you've used a bit too much flour, you can use a little force to press it on. Place the shaped roll onto a baking sheet lined with butter or oil, leaving some space between each roll. Repeat this for all 5 rolls. Once all 5 Shio Pan are shaped, cover them well. We'll let them proof for approximately 1 hour or until visibly puffed up to about double their original size. During this proofing stage, take some time to preheat your oven to 230 degrees Celsius. And we also want to make our gelatinized rice flour mix. Now, if you've followed this channel since the start, you know that I'm against making Tangzhong in a pan for use inside the bread dough. It's too uncontrollable and doesn't have many benefits. But for toppings, it's a different story. I think it's actually best to make this gelatinized starch topping in a pan because rice flour has a higher gelatinization point, and we're using a lot more water here. So clumps are a little more difficult to avoid if you don't heat it in a pan. So what I'll do is measure out 10 grams of rice flour at about 15 times the water and cook it on the stove for about 2 to 3 minutes until it thickens and is nice and smooth. At this point, I like to weigh it again to make sure that the final ratio of rice flour to water is around 1 to 9 or 1 to 10. But it is very forgiving, so you can go a bit higher or lower. And then you can place this mixture into a container and store it until you want to use it. You can even make it ahead of time and keep it in the fridge for a day or two. Okay, when the dough is done proofing, uncover the rolls and we're brushing on our gelatinized rice flour mix. One coating is enough, but make sure to get all the sides and try to brush it evenly over the dough. And we'll repeat this for all pieces. I did try doing 2 coats of this mixture, but found that it drastically decreased crispness retention, although the coats did make it a little bit crispier at the start. When we're done with that, we're going to top things off with a sprinkle of salt. I've got some pretzel salt and Himalayan rock salt. Again, like I said in the opening, you can use flaky or pyramidal sea salt for a salty blast, and coarse, dense rock salt for a less salty sensation. It's up to your personal preference. After adding the salt, we'll carefully open the preheated oven and place the baking tray inside at a position closer to the top. Bake for 15 minutes at 200 degrees Celsius with the fan on, and continue baking for another 10 to 15 minutes at a reduced temperature of 180 degrees Celsius, or until the rolls are a deep golden brown all over. The degree of brown that you bake to is up to your personal preference, but it's important to know that the longer you bake for, the crispier the bread is. So do time this carefully. Additionally, every oven is different, so make sure to adjust these settings to your oven, and you may need to rotate the tray to get an even bake. Once baked to a beautiful deep golden brown, carefully remove the baking sheet from the oven. For more gloss and better flavor, immediately brush the tops of the hot Shio Pan generously with the melted butter. Move the Shio Pan to a wire rack then to cool completely. The melting butter will have created those lovely pockets, and the salty topping will enhance the flavor. And that's how you bake these distinctive Shio Pan with their tapered shape and delicious salty butter filling. Just listen to that addictive crunch. And that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and bye!